Thank you very much. My paper revolving around two amazing spirits of 20th and beginning of 20th and beginning of 21st century. On one side we have amazing C.S. Lewis, and on the other the most famous evolutionist, neo-evolutionist of the last few decades, Richard Dockings. Therefore, I said two research paradigms with or with and without God hypothesis. In my paper, I try to learn, we try to learn something about the way we cope with analytical investigation of reality by comparing these ideas of two iconic Oxford figures. And it is so fascinating to understand how these two great thinkers of the 20th century can answer the question of life, such as reasoned belief, the God hypothesis concerning our place and purpose in this world. One could raise the question what we might learn by engaging with both Dockings and Lewis on some big questions in life, including issues of meaning and faith, or the relationship of the natural sciences and the arts. Meaning is often connected with world views or big pictures of reality that link individual aspects of life together into an interconnected whole. Religious belief is widely acknowledged as affirming the intelligibility and coherence of our world. First, let's call it chapter Big Pictures, Why Meaning Matters. First Dockings, then Lewis, and then comparative analysis. Dockings, born in 1941, uses the term Darwinism to designate both Darwin's theory of the original biological diversity and the broader world view based on this theory. Dockings' The God Delusion developed the suggestion that religion is an accidental byproduct of the evolutionary process, a misfiring of something useful. He also uses the metaphysical framework of this universal Darwinism to reject any notion of purpose, a view summarized in his well-known statement that the universe has, I quote, no design, no purpose, no evil and no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. It's from River Out of Eden. Ironically, Darwinism does not and cannot explain everything. It deals with how life evolves. Some of the most significant events in the history of the universe, such as the Big Bang, and the regions of life lie beyond its scope. Nonetheless, Dockings see in Darwinism a framework for reflecting on human meaning in general and not simply on biological development. So it's the reason why we are so interested to engage with Dockings is that it forces us to think about the place of science in developing a big picture of life. Can science answer all our big questions about the meaning of life? Or does it really deal with the quite different questions of how the universe and human beings function? For Dockings, science tells us all we can hope to know. For others, it has limits that are to be respected, so that we look to other intellectual disciplines or undertakings to answer other questions, including questions of meaning. This is undoubtedly more than needs to be said about Dockings' approach, and we shall pick up this later. But now we need to introduce our second dialogue partner, Clive Staples Lewis, 1891, 98, 1963. In a simple single word, mere Christianity. Lewis' big picture is mere Christianity. Starting from Lewis' initial atheism, which was hardened by his experience as a soldier in the British Army during the First World War. His question, how could God allow such pointless suffering and devastation? And he saw atheism as the default position of any right-thinking person. During the 1920s, however, Louis started to change his mind. He set out his view by contrasting two forces that seemed to be at war within his soul: a plausible yet dull rationalism and a risky yet potentially exhilarating faith. He confessed, "Nearly all that I love, I believe to be imaginary. Nearly all that I believe to be real, I thought grim and meaningless." Louis came to see God as both the ground of the rationality of the world and the one who enables us to grasp that rationality. For him, the truths of the Christian faith lie beyond the reach of human reason. Yet, when these or those truths are presented and grasped, their rationality can easily be discerned. And one hallmark of that rationality is the ability of the Christian faith to make things intelligible. I'm fond of this quotation from this extraordinary, enormous spirit, Louis. "I believe in Christianity, as I believe that the sun has risen, not only because I see it, but because by it I see everything else." Now, a few words reflecting on Dockings and Louis, this first part. Both see intellectual reflection on this big question as natural and significant. Dockings, like many within the new atheism movement, holds a view of religion determined by the myth of the warfare of science and religion, a view that emerged during the late 19th century for social reasons, but has long been discredited by historical research. Louis also helps us to think about the danger of controlling myth, which lead us to demonize others. He found a persuasive answer to his concerns in a long conversation with his Oxford colleague, J.R.R. Tolkien. Tolkien argued that human beings tell stories that are unconsciously patterned on the Christian grand narrative of creation redemption. For him, one of the great strengths of that narrative was its ability to explain why we tell stories of meaning in the first place. Second part of my paper, a reasoned belief, faith, proof, and evidence. It is often said that we live in a post-truth world in which we just make up our beliefs. We decide that we would like to be true, then live as if it were true, hoping nobody will come along and ask us difficult questions about our reasons for holding these beliefs. But then, how can we show that our beliefs make sense? Can we prove that they are right? Or if we can't prove them, what's the next best thing? These are important questions. Just about all of us hold certain beliefs, be they religious, ethical, or political. Is there a God? What is the good life? Nobody is really certain about the answers to these questions, but we can still offer good reasons for what we believe. So how do Louis and Dockings help us to think about the questions? Let's begin by looking at Louis' approach. He holds that Christianity provides a big picture of reality, an intellectually capacious and imaginatively satisfying way of seeing things, one that helps make us make sense of what we observe or experience. His approach to the rationality of religious belief emphasizes its capacity to unfold our experience of the world and help us discern what it means. As Ludwig Wittgenstein pointed out, one and the same proposition or idea may at one point be treated as something to be tested and at another as a rule of testing. Louis himself is quite clear that Christianity does not offer us a totally clear view of reality and readily concedes that there are certain things that do not fit comfortably. For example, the problem of pain and suffering, the subjects of two of his books. his counter-argument would be that we should compare possible approaches and see which makes the most sense of a complex and fuzzy reality. Lewis himself uses his approach in his masterpiece, Mere Christianity. He knows that many people have known a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy. After exploring this observation, he offers three possible explanations for such a sense of emptiness or lack of fulfillment. Very fast I pass on. First, this frustration might arise from looking for its true object in the wrong place. We therefore need to keep searching. Second, it might be that there is no true object to be found. And Lewis suggests that there is a third approach which recognizes that these earthly longings are only a kind of copy or echo or mirage of our true homeland. Since this overwhelming desire cannot be fulfilled through anything in the present world, this suggests that its ultimate object lies beyond this world. Now, Dockings, his commitment to a scientific assessment of evidence leads him to adopt a strongly critical attitude towards any beliefs inadequately grounded in the observable. I quote, "As a lover of truth, I am suspicious of strongly held beliefs that are unsupported by evidence." For Dockings, religious faith is blind trust in the absence of evidence. For him, there is no room for faith in science, precisely because the evidence compels us to draw certain valid conclusions. In The Selfish Gene, he proposes an absolute dichotomy between blind faith and the overwhelming publicly available evidence. I quote, "But what, after all, is faith? It is a state of mind that leads people to believe something in a total absence of supporting evidence. If there were good supporting evidence, then faith would be superfluous, for the evidence would compel us to believe it anyway." Because the lack of time, I feel forced, compelled to pass through onto this chapter and coming to the final, probably the most important chapter. Is there a God? Is there a God? The major question is that concerning the belief in God. How reasonable is this? Both Lewis and Dockings give this question extended discussion. Dockings takes the view that God is a good, perhaps the best example of an unevidenced belief, a delusion. People believe in God because this belief has been hammered into them by aggressively religious families or schools, or because they have failed to think seriously about superior scientific understandings of the world, which make believing God both unnecessary and implausible. No good reason can be given for believing in God. It is irrational for a modern person to believe in God, which must be seen as a throwback to an earlier pre-scientific age in which such beliefs seemed incredible. Yet Christians do not see God as a physical object within the universe, analogous to a new moon orbiting the planet Neptune. God is rather the ground, from our perspective, and cause of all things, who stands behind and beyond the universe, while also choosing to self-disclose in human form. Dockings has another point to make that needs to be taken very seriously, namely the moral character of God. God, for him, is intellectually superfluous and morally repugnant. He is a tyrant, an oppressor, who imprisons humanity with a constricted intellectual straitjacket. The God delusion speaks eloquently of a Gnostic God who stalks every page of the Old Testament. And I have no time to go further. We know the position of most of the scholars of the Old Testament who fought Dockings for his wooden and uncomprehending reading of this text of the Old Testament, particularly his failure to do justice to the complexity of its vision of God, or to realize that Christians interpret the Old Testament in the light of Jesus Christ seen as the fulfillment of law and prophets. This is one of the reasons why so many have criticized Dockings for ridiculing a concept of God that seems to bear little relation to the Christian God. On the other side, C.S. Lewis, God as the heart's desire. For him, God is neither an object within our universe nor a mere abstract philosophical idea. Although our quest may begin with rational arguments or take these along the way, the goal of that quest is a personal reality. He says, the existence of God is a speculative question as long as it is a question at all. But once it has been answered in the affirmative, you get quite a new situation. You are no longer faced with an argument which demands your assent, but with a person who demands your confidence. To have faith in God is not primarily to give intellectual assent to an idea, but to step into a greater picture of our world and become part of it. Although Dockings and Lewis reach quite different conclusions, their lines of argument are surprisingly similar. Each is asking which way of thinking seems to fit in better with our observations. The question is resonance or consonance between theory and observation, not proof of theory by observation. In the end, these two thinkers reach different judgments about God, yet by similar intellectual trajectories. Neither of their position is proved or provable. Conclusion. Perhaps one obvious conclusion is that both are men of faith, in that both hold committed positions that cannot be proved right, but which they clearly regard as justified and reasonable. It is instructive to compare Dockings' shallow account of proof with the more realistic reflection of poets such as Alfred Lord Tennyson. His poem, The Ancient Sage, provides a concise summary of the dilemma of human beings as they try to make sense of our world and live meaningfully within it. For nothing worthy proving can be proven, nor yet disproven. Lord Tennyson. We found that setting Lewis and Dockings side by side illuminates both the human condition and the inevitability of some form of faith and living a meaningful life. Within an atheist perspective, a repulsive deity is the mirror image of the repulsive human beings who invented this idea of God. So what does this tell us about human nature? Given the human moral fiascos of the 20th century, few would now echo the naive moral optimism of the Victorian atheist poet Algernon Swinburne. Glory to man in the highest, for man is the master of things. The great question of life remain debated and are discussed precisely because they are so important and because they transcend the evidential and the rational capacity of human beings. We ought to know how we and our universe work, yet we also need to know what they mean. And last and not least, for Lewis, reason is the natural organ of truth, but imagination is the organ of meaning. And we need both if we are to find our way into something both true and trustworthy at the one hand, yet capable of helping us find meaning on the other. Thank you very much for your kind attention.